Nancy Harwell had never begged for anything in her 19 years of life, and she was not about to start now. She stood at the wooden counter of the First Frontier Bank, her chin level, her hands folded neatly in front of her despite the fact that they were trembling. The bank smelled of leather and pipe smoke, and the man sitting across from her, Mr. Gerald Caldwell, smelled of both. He was a wide man, thick through the shoulders, with small eyes that had a way of looking at people like they were already defeated. He slid the paper across the counter without looking up. 60 days, Miss Harwell. That's all the extension I'm prepared to offer. He finally raised his eyes. $420, every cent, or the farm belongs to the bank. Nancy looked at the number written on the paper. She had looked at it before, many times, in the letters that had arrived at their door over the past year. But seeing it written in ink, handed to her across a bank counter by a man who didn't flinch while delivering it, made it feel like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread through her chest and didn't stop. "My father is ill," she said. Her voice was steady, she had practiced that. "He cannot work the land alone. We had a bad harvest, 2 bad harvests. Most folks out here have bad harvests, Miss Harwell." Caldwell folded his hands. "That is the nature of the frontier. It does not change what is owed." She picked up the paper, folded it once, and tucked it into the pocket of her coat. She thanked him because her mother had raised her to be polite even when politeness felt like swallowing glass, and she walked out of that bank into the hard afternoon light of Saddleback, Texas. The town was not large. One main road, a general store, a livery stable, a church at the far end that leaned slightly to the left as though it had grown tired of standing straight. Nancy had grown up riding into Saddleback with her father on supply runs, back when he was strong enough to lift grain sacks and laugh loudly at other men's jokes. That felt like a different life now. She tied her horse at the post outside Merritt's general store and went inside to think. She bought nothing. She couldn't afford to, but Martha Merritt, who was kind and had known Nancy since childhood, set a cup of coffee on the counter and didn't ask for anything in return. "You look like a woman carrying a mountain," Martha said. "Only a small one," Nancy replied, wrapping both hands around the cup. It was at that counter, half listening to 2 ranch hands talking at the far end of the store, that she heard the name. "Calloway Ranch is hiring," one of them was saying, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "Henry's looking for a cook and a housekeeper. His last one quit, said the work was too hard." He laughed. "She lasted 2 weeks. "Henry Calloway doesn't look like a hard man," the other one said. "He ain't hard, he's just particular, wants things done right. Place runs like a machine out there, cattle, horses, the whole operation. Man's got a good ranch." Nancy set her coffee cup down slowly. She turned just enough to speak without it seeming like she had been listening. "This Calloway Ranch," she said. "How far out is it?" The first ranch hand looked at her. "About 9 miles east, past the Red Ridge. You can't miss the gate, he's got a C branded on the post. And he's genuinely hiring, far as I know. Why, you looking for work, miss?" Nancy picked up her cup again and took a calm sip. "I might be," she said. She rode home with the folded bank paper in her pocket and a new thought forming in her mind like a fire catching on dry wood. The farm sat at the bottom of a slow hill, surrounded by land that had once produced enough wheat to feed 3 families through winter. Now it produced dust and silence. The fence along the east side had been broken since spring and never fixed. The barn roof had a hole in it that let in starlight, which would have been beautiful if it weren't a problem. Her father was sitting on the porch when she arrived. Thomas Harwell was 53 years old but looked older now. His hands, which had once been the strongest hands she had ever known, rested in his lap with the careful stillness of a man who had learned to conserve everything. "Well?" he asked. She sat down beside him and told him about the 60 days. She did not soften it. He deserved the truth more than he deserved comfort. He was quiet for a long time. A hawk circled slowly above the east pasture. "I'll find the money," Nancy said. I have a lead on a job." Her father looked at her the way he had always looked at her, like she was the most capable person he had ever met, and it both filled him with pride and broke his heart at the same time. "You shouldn't have to," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I do." She went inside, packed a modest bag, and made a decision that would change everything, though she did not yet know the full weight of what she was walking toward. The Calloway Ranch was nothing like Nancy had expected, and everything she needed it to be. She had imagined something rough, a working man's place, functional and bare, smelling of cattle and neglect. Instead, the ranch house was solid and well kept, built from good timber with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. The yard was clean. The fences were straight. The horses in the front paddock were healthy and calm. Everything about the place said that the man who ran it paid attention. Henry Calloway met her at the gate. He was younger than she had pictured, perhaps 26 or 27, lean, and weathered in the way that outdoor work makes a man, with steady brown eyes and a handshake that was firm without being forceful. He did not look her up and down the way some men did. He looked directly at her face when he spoke, which she noticed immediately. "Miss Harwell," he said, "Martha Merritt sent word you'd be coming. She speaks well of you." "She's generous," Nancy said. "She's honest," Henry replied. "There's a difference. Come on, I'll show you the house." The work was real and it was hard, but Nancy had never been afraid of either. She was up before sunrise every morning, had breakfast ready before the ranch hands came in from the early rounds, kept the house in order, and by the end of the first week had reorganized the kitchen in a way that made every meal faster and cleaner to produce. Henry said nothing about it directly, but she caught him standing in the kitchen doorway one evening, looking at the reorganized shelves with something close to quiet appreciation. The ranch hands, 4 of them, older and weathered, tested her in the way that men sometimes test women who arrive in their world without asking permission. They were not cruel about it, just watchful. By the end of the second week, when she had fixed a supply ledger that had been miscounted for months and saved the ranch a significant overcharge from the grain supplier, the testing stopped. After that they were respectful, and one of them, a gray-bearded man named Cletus, started leaving the best cuts of firewood stacked by the kitchen door without being asked. It was Henry, though, who surprised her most. He did not treat her like hired help, and he did not treat her like a guest. He treated her like a person doing an important job, which turned out to be the most dignified thing anyone had offered her in a long time. He explained things without being condescending. He asked her opinion about the household accounts. On her 5th evening at the ranch, he offered to teach her proper riding technique because he had quietly noticed that her horse favored her left side on turns. "You're compensating for him," Henry said, watching her circle the paddock. "Loosen your right rein just slightly. Let him find his own balance." She did. The horse moved smoother instantly. "You're good at seeing what's off," she said, slowing to a stop beside him. Henry looked at the horizon with a small, thoughtful expression. "I had a good teacher," he said. Then he walked back toward the barn and said nothing more about it. The evenings were when they truly talked. After supper, when the ranch hands had retired and the work of the day had settled, Henry would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and Nancy found herself sitting across from him more nights than not. They talked about cattle prices and crop rotations and the particular loneliness of frontier life. Henry was not a man who spoke carelessly. Every word he used seemed chosen, and Nancy matched him in that way. Their conversations had a quality of honesty that she had not experienced with many people. It was on one of those evenings, 10 days into her time at the ranch, that Henry told her about his father. He did not use the name at first. He spoke carefully, looking into his coffee cup like it held the right words somewhere at the bottom. "I left home 6 years ago," he said. "My father is a banker in Saddleback, a successful one by most measures. But I watched him take a family's land, people I knew, good people, using a debt that I later found out had been inflated by fraudulent fees buried in the paperwork. Legal enough on the surface, wrong all the way through. He paused. I couldn't stay after that, couldn't put my name next to his. Nancy felt the blood leave her face slowly, like water draining from a bowl. She said nothing. She kept her expression still through sheer force of will, the same way she had kept her voice steady in that bank, because every word Henry had just spoken was the exact shape of her family's story. These people, she said carefully, the family he took the land from. Never knew their full name, Henry said quietly. I was young. I just knew it was wrong. He looked up at her then, and something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of a question forming behind his eyes. He looked at her the way a man looks when a piece of a puzzle moves unexpectedly. Miss Harwell, he said slowly, where exactly is your father's farm? The fire crackled between them. The night pressed close. And Nancy realized, with a cold and certain clarity, that the storm she had been outrunning had just arrived at the porch. Nancy told him everything. She did not plan to. She had spent 10 days carefully guarding her name, her reason for being there, the fragile plan she had built around proximity and hope. But sitting on that porch, with Henry's honest eyes waiting and the weight of her father's 60 days pressing down like a boot on her chest, the careful walls she had built simply gave way. She told him about the debt, about the fraudulent fees she had never understood but had always felt were wrong, about her father's illness, the broken fence, the barn roof with its hole that let in starlight, about Mr. Gerald Caldwell sliding that paper across the counter without flinching, about 42 days remaining on a clock that did not care about any of it. Henry listened without interrupting. When she finished, the porch was completely silent except for the fire and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Then he stood up, went inside, and came back carrying a locked tin box. He set it on the table between them, produced a small key from his vest pocket, and opened it. Inside was a collection of documents, folded and worn at the edges from handling, the kind of papers a man returns to often, turning them over in his mind without yet knowing what to do with them. I have been building this for 3 years, Henry said. Statements from 2 former bank clerks, a letter from a land attorney in Austin who confirmed the fee structure my father used was fraudulent under territorial law, records of 4 families who lost property the same way. He looked at her steadily. I never acted because I had no one willing to stand beside me in front of the sheriff. A son accusing his father alone looks like a family quarrel. It gets buried. Nancy looked at the documents. Then she looked at him. I'll stand beside you, she said. They rode into Saddleback the following morning before Gerald Caldwell opened his bank. Sheriff Amos Reed was an old man who had been honest his entire career precisely because he was too stubborn to be anything else. Nancy had seen him briefly on her first day in town, a quiet, straight-backed figure outside the general store, and had registered him the way you register something solid in an uncertain landscape. Henry trusted him. That was enough. They laid the documents on the sheriff's desk, and Henry spoke clearly and without anger, the way a man speaks when he has been rehearsing the truth for years and is finally ready to deliver it. Sheriff Reed read every page. He asked 3 questions. He reached for his hat. I'll need both of you present, he said. This gets done in the open. Gerald Caldwell was standing outside his bank when they arrived, and he saw his son first. The expression that crossed his face moved through several emotions quickly: surprise, confusion, then a cold and calculating anger that settled like a mask. He looked at Nancy second, and something shifted behind his eyes as the recognition landed. You brought the debtor's daughter to my door, he said to Henry, his voice low and controlled. I raised you better than this. You raised me well enough to know the difference, Henry replied. What followed was not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes make these moments. There was no shouting, no drawn weapon, no theatrical collapse. Gerald Caldwell was a man who had built his power on paperwork, and it was paperwork that undid him, quietly, publicly, and completely. Sheriff Reed read the relevant findings aloud on the street in front of a gathering of townspeople. The fraudulent fee structure was confirmed. The debt against the Harwell farm was declared unlawfully inflated and legally void. Gerald Caldwell was escorted to the sheriff's office. His face, as he passed his son, held an expression that was almost worse than anger. It was the look of a man who understood, for the first time, that he had lost something that money could never have purchased. Henry watched him go without satisfaction and without regret, just with the quiet resolution of a man who had finally done what he should have done years earlier. Thomas Harwell wept when Nancy rode home and told him. He tried to hide it, turning his face toward the east pasture, but his shoulders gave him away. Nancy sat beside him and did not pretend she hadn't noticed, because he deserved to be seen in that moment as much as any other. Within a week, Henry arrived at the farm with 2 ranch hands, fencing materials, and a proposition. Not charity, a genuine partnership. He needed a reliable wheat supplier for his ranch. The Harwell farm, properly restored, was perfectly positioned. Terms were fair, written clearly, and signed by both men with a handshake that meant more than the paper beneath it. The farm came back to life slowly, the way good things do. The fence went up. The barn roof was repaired. The east field was planted before the season closed. On a warm evening in late October, Nancy stood on the porch of the Calloway ranch, looking out at land that seemed to go on without end. Henry came and stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched, and neither of them moved away. "You came here to save your father's farm," he said. "I did," she replied. "Did you find anything else?" Nancy looked at the open sky, at the last light spreading gold across the ridge, at the life she had built with her own hands from the wreckage of desperation. She thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere broken and leave standing. "Everything," she said quietly. "I found everything."